I would like to pose one question to the panel. It came up early in Scott's presentation, and I'd like to know what the group thinks in general of, as we've all worked in the design community on Chinese projects, the reference and the standards perhaps that are around second and third tier as we use that reference. Are those references still valid today as that market continues to mature, or have the standards and implications with those two terms, has that changed?
I think, sorry, from our perspective, it gets back to what I said about China having an American moment. And what I meant by that is our country here grew very rapidly 150 years ago. And many of our major cities grew up even less than 100 years ago. So that moment is happening in China now. And when we don't, as designers, I think, judge first tier, second tier, third tier, instead we see these as opportunities to shape that future in ways that, frankly, our country didn't fully anticipate properly. So don't only focus on those high density areas that are in some ways growing but mature in their framework. Focus on the cities that have the potential greatest impact to the future, even if it is enormous and you've never heard of it before. It's very important.
I can add something.
Please.
I agree. I think as we expand the need of cities, China has many challenges that it has to overcome, and one is the migration of people into cities. And if we in the press here in the United States, we hear of things that are going on, and particularly in Beijing, where the city is having to make some very difficult decisions on who can and who cannot live in Beijing. We can't say that here in the United States, but Beijing is a city that can only grow, it can only support so much. And we have to start looking at bringing higher qualities of life, better wages, better work opportunities, better living standards into these interior cities. That's the only way I think that the Chinese cities, particularly the more successful ones, will continue to survive. Because I think they will be overrun by overpopulation, and they will destroy the quality of life in those cities. So, like Guiyang and other cities in the western provinces, we need to really look at how we create better cities and better opportunities for people to stay in those cities and create lives in those cities. I think it's very important.
Well, I would just add picking up on that, I would add that one of the greatest challenges in doing that is to create a sort of a civic commitment to creating an open space that will go with that expansion of the core, for example, or these existing cities. And that's what makes it that much more of a challenge than developing new cities. It's working into a fabric that has already been woven and reweaving it in a way that it can accommodate more people, and that involves requiring a little bit more space. That isn't, in fact, development. It's not buildings. In fact, it has to do with the quality of life that we are promising for our citizens in that new city.
Great. Thank you for that perspective. It's very interesting. I believe we have a couple of questions out here, please. Please let us know who you are and where you're from.
Hi, Teofil Gandolfo. I work for Schindler in Shanghai, but I have a non-elevator question. You talked about redesigning cities and, how should I say, maximizing their efficiency, but also what we see in China a lot is the development of a completely new CBD. Now, in reference to what Scott said as well, this is an opportunity to overlook the mistakes that were done in urbanism previously. Now, what we see actually in a lot of cases in China, if we take, for example, Nanning, Lanzhou, or even Guizhou, we see that the CBD, which has been redesigned, actually has a variable distance to what the old city center is. So based on that, I was wondering if the panel actually had any thoughts on what is the optimal distance of creating a new CBD from the old CBD?
I want to just let us all recall that there's some of our favorite, greatest European cities, in fact, have the original core of the city, in Barcelona, is it called the Rustica section? And then there's the newer sections of Barcelona, and they can coexist and be in a great dialogue with one another. So I don't think it necessarily has to be an either-or situation. Those conditions can actually happen. What you're looking for is an answer about the distance between one and the other.
Exactly.
I don't know the metrics.
Right. Oh, sorry. Yes, I'm speaking in kilometers.
I don't think there is a metrics, because I think I agree with what Thomas has just said. You look at Shanghai.
Yeah.
You've got Puxi, you've got Pudong. They're only separated by a river, basically, from the cores of from those areas. You ask someone, though, would they prefer to live in Puxi? Yes. Do they prefer to maybe work in Pudong? Maybe. So I think it's really more of the question of, it's not how far they are apart, it's how do you create the quality of life issues that make them both vibrant, that makes them both work. And I think the challenge that we face in these new CBDs is, in some of the early CBD developments, it's kind of a suburban mentality about how we create urban form. And it tries to be green, and it tries to create space, and it tries to do all these things. But, Pudong isn't the most pleasant place to be on a Saturday. It's not where I want to go hang out. I want to go to the parks of the older city. So it's how do we create that vertical environment that allows for people to enjoy and really be part of that new CBD that we're making. We don't want to create those ghost towns that we made the mistakes of developing here in the United States in the 60s and 70s. We have to take those lessons and apply them in these new CBDs.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Got one up front right here.
My name is Chris Gage from a company called Yordal. We're a supplier of heavy-duty connection systems for structural and facade connections. Looking at the topology of the city, I see there's a lot of, or there has been in the past, a lot of seismic activity. Is that, could you, maybe the panel, address what special designs were done to accommodate that seismic activity?
Well, my structural engineers told me that this is the best place to do a tall building because it's they have great bedrock and great seismic, it's a low seismic zone. So it wasn't a particular driver in the case of the Guiyang World Trade Center. Not a major, aside from the rigidness that we brought in with the concrete tube system. It wasn't a major driver for the project. So, I don't know that there'd be a whole lot to add from either Tom or Greg about that. Maybe we can talk after.
That's fine. Thank you, I appreciate it.
I have a question for I'm from China and Ikari Design Institute. I'm an architect, so I want to. The question is, in China is now a lot of CBD in the city and big city, and now the secondary cities have the CBD as well. So what do you think about the CBD should be the same, or just think about some cultural background if in different city, or maybe in the same face, same facade, same face, or same functional, or maybe another think about so based on this cultural background, or some people they're a little bit different and working, or some else some reason. Could you explain that?
Right. So, I think he's highlighting the question of to what degree is cultural identity part of the design and, of the place where it's located. And we, think deeply about this in approaching projects. In the case of the master plan, that the World Trade Center is at the middle of, we tried to create a mix of contemporary elements and traditional urban forms. The overwhelming pressure from the development community is to do something from abroad, something contemporary, and it's created, I would say, a lot of homogeneity of experience. You know, one mall feels like another mall, same mix of uses on the parcel. So we, in projects like this, have tried to bring in more of a village scale. And materials, you may have noticed, were, you know, more masonry, and the articulation of the buildings bears resemblance to the vernacular architecture. But so it's a real balance, I think, because we want both. We want the new and some of the traditional elements.
I would also say that in the we have an opportunity to celebrate the cultural heritage of any particular place through the public realm. In that public realm, I think we have an opportunity to really be inspired by a great heritage of open spaces or riverfronts, and translate those into 21st century living, but do it in a way that people can easily reference back to their original culture and vice versa. So we think those open spaces are above and beyond the architectural expressions. The open spaces are another opportunity for that place to develop its own very special identity. We don't have to erase the past. On the other hand, we don't think we have to create a theme park or an old historical city for the future. It's a very delicate balance, but I think it can be done with a lot of sensitivity towards those goals.
Can I add, I'd like to add something that ties these two threads together.
Please.
You know, as you go to some of these, you know, we've been in China now. I've lived in China for 12 years, so I've seen projects that start out on the drawing boards and end up being built. Some of these new kind of CBDs or new tech centers or these kind of new developments that occurred and probably were envisioned in say 2005, 2006 are starting to be built, realized, occupied, and many of them, I don't mean to demean them, but to me they're kind of filing cabinets for people. And typically they're environments where people work. The Chinese ordinances, the land use ordinances, do not identify mixed use as a land use. And so it's very important that we have to look at strategies that bring mixed use to the equation. You have to have people living, working, and enjoying the sites to be able, in order to animate and give these places special purpose. It's going to take, I think, for example, in Shanghai, in Zhongtian area where they built the Thames Town development, it's taken years for it to finally get some energy going to make it a place or a destination where people want to be. I think the projects that we're working on at Guiyang, I don't think we're going to have that problem because we're right in the heart of the city. We're right in the middle of things. We're building new cities within the old city. And I think that to me is a trend that will be very, it will be energized very quickly and be very successful.
Thank you.
Other questions?
Hi, my name is Monica and I'm from India. I was looking at these developments in China, and China and India being very nearby, but the kind of development that China has seen, obviously India will see in some time, maybe at some pace. So comparing, I don't know if any of you have worked in India or are planning to, what are the advantages and disadvantages that you found working in China or such places which are developing now versus what you would foresee if you're ever trying or planning to work in India?
Go ahead.
So it's interesting that you raised that. I, for one, have worked extensively in India and can't help compare the experiences of working in India to those that I see in China. And at the risk of being simplistic, I think a lot of it, the major difference has to do with the degree of complicity of the government with the private development community. In China, they can be indistinguishable and very effective. In India, it's very nonlinear, and projects start and stop, and great things have been achieved, but was it what Plato said? Democracy is a failure. It's very difficult to get the kind of decisions and funding in place that China's been able to do and to build their cities very, very quickly. That's, I think, the fundamental difference.
Plus, I think China has the ability to drive infrastructure decisions that allow cities to be able to sustain themselves. The high-speed rail developments in China, the highway developments. When I moved to Shanghai 12 years ago, it took us 3 hours to get from Shanghai to Wuxi on a not-so-great train system. Today, I can do it in 47 minutes on high-speed rail. And the Chinese government can put the levers of progressive development into play, and they can make it happen because of that relationship between the private sector and the public sector.
It was interesting to hear Rick Clark, clearly on the side of private development, here highlight the importance of his magic wand moment was to get transportation aligned with the private development, and that would unlock all of the value. And that's, from my own experience, I think Greg's saying the same thing, that there is complicity that's required between the private sector and public development and infrastructure and so on.
We have another question, I think, here.
Hi, my name is Willie Shu from the Couple International. We also one of LDI on this Zhongtian project. I do have a question for Scott. As a designer, for such a landmark tower, today you're talking about a concrete structure, But as a designer, if you got your magic wand, what's your choice of structure system you would pick for this the 300 or 400 meter tower? It's interesting to know that.
Yeah, well, I thought I said it, but I think we're going to see more concrete, and we're experimenting with the architectural expression that comes with that, and enjoying that. I mean, we have a history of doing that as a firm, and I think it's a great opportunity. We have to be aware that the kind of iconic building phenomenon is way too fast, I think, for the culture of construction and architecture to catch up with it and do it in a responsible way. We like to focus on the elements of architecture. A steel building can be beautiful, a concrete building can be beautiful, and it's really what matters long term is how that building responds over time and the economics behind it, and so on. So there's not a kind of preference per se, but if you ask from an energy perspective, concrete is for sure the way to go.